Some winters are pretty, others make a whole lot of yard work for you. This has been one that's made a lot of work, lots of ice on the trees. Heavy ice, of course, means downed branches, broken trees. A perfect excuse to improvise a shelter. Building a shelter allows me to clean the yard, please my wife, and have some fun. I also get to use up some old rope and a piece of plastic I had sitting in my shop. Now all I have to do is find the perfect place to build a shelter. I don't have a lot of options, but this one will do okay. To accomplish the task, I'll turn to 3 core pieces of my kit. One of my favorite knives, my favorite axe, and my favorite saw. There's nothing really glamorous about this sort of work. The branches are heavy with ice that I'll have to shake off before I can use it to build the shelter. Not terribly exciting, but if you're interested in seeing how I'm doing it, I suppose I should show it to you. Maybe I should add some music to make it more exciting. My Baco Laplander saw is the key to a lot of the initial sawing tasks here. It's sharp, it's lightweight, and it does a brilliant job on this kind of work. Sometimes the enormous weight of these icy limbs forces me to use my Gransfors Bruck's small forest axe to quicken the job. To make the poles I want to use for the framework of my shelter, I have to limb these fallen branches. So I'm going to use my Gransfors Bruck's small forest axe for the job. Because this axe is so incredibly sharp, and has been ever since I got it from the manufacturer, this is a pleasure to do, and a very easy task, particularly with green wood. These branches I'm shaving off, however, will serve multiple purposes. I'll use some of them for a layer of insulation and camouflage on the back of the shelter. I'm not really trying to hold in a lot of warmth with them, but this is what I have available, and I don't want them to go to waste. Other smaller, finer pieces of these branches I will use for insulation inside the shelter. For now, though, my task is to carry all of the poles and the limbs from where I worked on them to the site where I want to build the shelter. My idea is to use a tripod to support one end of the ridgepole, and then to use a square lashing to fasten the other end of a ridgepole to a tree. I did a really beautiful job of making the tripod lashing to form the tripod itself, but unfortunately my editing skills were not as good. I deleted that part of the film. Here, however, is an image of the tripod lashing I used, and here is an image of what it looked like once it was done. On to the square lashing of the ridgepole. In case you're wondering what that looks like, here's an image of that. Both of these come from my old Boy Scout handbook, which I still have on my bookshelf and refer to from time to time, both for nostalgia and for good information. Here you see the final product, the ridgepole suspended between tripod and square lashing on the tree. The next part of the plan is to take this piece of scrap plastic that came with some packaging. Curiously, it forms an envelope, so I'm using my knife here to split the seams on both sides so I can double the size of the piece of plastic. Draped over the top, this plastic will form my water barrier. The next challenge is to tension the plastic by securing the corners with guy lines. What I'm going to do is wad up some leaves here, stick them in the corner, and then use a clove hitch around the ball of plastic and leaves to secure the end. On the other end, a taut line hitch will secure the guy line to a stake for purposes of adjustability. Here is one corner secured with the clove hitch. Now I repeat the same process on the other corner. To make the stakes that I will use to secure the guy lines, I'm going to limb this little branch with my Tops B.O.B. Fieldcraft knife, and then I'm going to cut it in half in both directions, notching it, twisting it a little bit, notching it again, twisting it a little bit again, repeating this process until I've gone all the way around the outside edge of the stick. At which point, as you will see, I flip it over and repeat the process again. My goal is not to cut through the stick here. My goal is simply to weaken it sufficiently that I can break it easily. A few chest lever cuts will provide the point for the stake, and I'll have what I need in no time. Having pounded in the stake, I now secure it with the taut line hitch, which is adjustable, allowing me to tension this tarp however I wish. Here is a close-up of the finished taut line hitch and stake. To create a little more headroom, I decided to tie off the center of the front as well. This will allow me an adjustable peak, and it'll help to shed water. My theme is to use scrap materials, and this rope certainly qualifies. It's about as junky a rope as you can get, made out of plastic that came with an inexpensive tarp. I'm tying it to the tree here with a trucker's hitch, an adjustable high-tension hitch which allows me to get good tension on the line. I now have begun the process of laying the poles that I limbed earlier on top of the ridge pole. I'll use these poles to provide a stronger framework, something that I can put some sticks across and then put the cedar boughs on top of, to provide some marginal insulation, but also just to make it a little bit more attractive and a little bit more camouflaged. After all, I want a decent looking backyard escape. Now it's time to put a pole parallel to the ridge pole on the outside of these. Then I'll tie those all down to keep all the poles that I leaned up to provide the roof frame in place. Once they stay in place, then I can start to add the other branches and the other limbs from the cedar tree. Okay, so this is nothing fancy, but it gives you a sense of how I'm creating a framework on the outside to provide some protection for the plastic and to keep these poles from sliding around once I start adding the cedar fronds on top of it. And that's the next step. So I'll take some poles that I have carefully trimmed of sharp spikes so as not to pierce the plastic, and I'll interlace these a little bit on top of these vertical poles, and those will provide a base subsequently for the cedar branches. I start by layering the cedar branches at the bottom with the foliage down there first, and gradually work my way up. I'm being very casual here. Again, obviously cedar is not going to be a good water repellent. It's not going to provide a great deal of insulation, so this is mostly about making something that's reasonably presentable and that offers a little bit of camouflage. I have to say I'm kind of pleased with the final appearance. It has a satisfying thickness of green and provides a fairly hefty coating on the outside. As I said before, I wanted to use some smaller pieces of these cedar branches to provide some insulation on the inside. What I meant is I don't want to lie down on this snow and ice. So what I'm going to do is take some very small pieces of cedar and throw them on the ground in a fairly high mound, and this will provide a layer of insulation to keep me off of the ice and snow. Cedar is not the most comfortable thing to lie down on, but these are relatively small pieces. Besides, I can always use my day pack as a seat. Well, here I am. It's begun to rain a little bit, dripping off the trees from the melt, and I'm safe and dry in my little makeshift shelter. I have to say there's a great feeling of satisfaction that comes from having built this. It feels really good to sit down too, after 4 or 5 hours of work. I don't know that it necessarily should have taken that long, but by the time I did a lot of different camera setups and had to think about the filming aspects as well as limbing the tree branches and hauling them to this spot, the time just seemed to run away from me. So, what do I do now? I'm going to have a cup of coffee. It's still cold. Now it's cold and wet. I'm tired and sore from having done this. So I'm going to enjoy a little bit of coffee heated up over an alcohol stove. Coffee, even inexpensive, cheap coffee, never tastes better than when you're outside. And it never tastes better than when you've done something to earn the cup of coffee. That's kind of how I feel now. What is it about us who enjoy the outdoors that we can sit and watch videos of people boiling water over and over and over again? I know I've done it before, and if you're still watching it at this point, I'm guessing you have too. The system that I'm using to heat the water is the Trail Design's Tri Caldera Cone system. I'm using their alcohol stove with it. It's a really great little system. You can never have too many cook kits, right? But that review will have to wait for another video. For all the gear junkies, I'm using the Totes 450 mug with Snow Peak hot lips and a couple of silicone bands to keep my fingers from burning on the bottom. I'm boiling the water in the Totes 550 milliliter pot, both titanium, and I'm using a titanium Light My Fire spork. Thank you for persevering and watching all of this. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. I enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed coming along for the ride. Until next time, friends, all I have to say is this: cheers.